Okay, so good morning. Thanks for joining us for this webinar, Your Zero Carbon Options Explained. This is the first of our webinars for the Net Zero Week in 2022. EDF are proud to be a sponsor of this National Awareness Week that highlights climate change challenges that businesses are facing and changes that can be made to make a real difference. We appreciate that each business is at a different stage on the net zero journey, and the content of this session will be new detail for some and reinforcing information for others. We've aimed to keep the content at a high level that we hope will be beneficial for our listeners today. Just go on to the next slide. So I'm Matt Yeoman, Key and Strategic Sector Manager at EDF Business Solutions. Joining me today is Amanda Smedley, Senior Account Manager for Large Business Sales. Together we'll guide you through some slides we've prepared for today, and I'll just start with some housekeeping. So just to let you know, the webinar is being recorded, so if you do need to play this back or pass it to any colleagues, you'll be able to do that. Throughout the webinar, there's the ability to ask questions through the Q&A function on Zoom. And then we'll cover those questions at the end. Over to you, Amanda.
Great, thanks, Matt. So as Matt has said, today we're focusing on the first steps that businesses can take on their journey towards net zero. The slide you can see on the screen now shows the plethora of capabilities that EDF can offer to support you throughout your net zero journey. But today, as we've said, we'll be focusing on the net zero carbon supply. Oh, sorry, not sure what happened there. Now, what is really needed to underpin any net zero strategy is to review your energy consumption and see if there are any opportunities in the first instance to reduce this. Our metering and data teams are fully equipped to support you with this through their monitoring and meeting solutions. However, if this is something you're already looking at, then stay tuned, as they say, to find out more about the renewable options we can offer. So I think that we all understand why achieving net zero is important globally, but sometimes it feels that that challenge is so immense that it can become overwhelming. This makes it tricky for us as businesses and even individuals to know where to start. Over the last few years, it has become mandatory for companies to report their global energy usage and greenhouse gas emissions. Reviewing these is a great place to start. These metrics can help you to make informed energy choices and help you to set your own decarbonisation goals. The GHG, or the Greenhouse Gas Protocol, for example, includes 3 elements for review. Scope 1, which details your direct company emissions. Scope 2, which details your emissions that come from the energy you purchase. And Scope 3, which includes emissions within your value chain. From reviewing the data against each scope, some companies have used these to set decarbonisation goals and even science-based targets against each scope that I've just outlined. However, why is it so important that businesses want a zero carbon supply? Sorry, excuse me. Apologise, I got a horrible cold. Well, firstly, we know consumers are becoming more buying conscious and are increasingly seeking out products and services that are more sustainable. We are also seeing companies analysing their supply chain more thoroughly and demanding that suppliers also have positive sustainability credentials. Sorry, excuse me. It's worth noting as well that for most companies, Scope 3 emissions account for over 80% of their greenhouse gas impact. So this is why Scope 3 is becoming especially important. Furthermore, you'll all be aware that rising wholesale costs of gas and electricity are seeing energy prices skyrocket. It's therefore imperative that companies within the UK invest in more renewable technologies, one way or another, to reduce the UK's reliance on energy imports, especially gas, which will help to keep the wholesale energy price down. Businesses are paying more than ever before for their energy, and some are therefore wanting to take action to reduce this, but again are potentially unsure what steps to take. But most importantly, the UK simply can't achieve net zero without businesses acting. It was made abundantly clear at COP26 that if we are to reach our net zero ambition by 2050, we will all need to work together. It is crucial that we recognise the discussions at COP26 and drive action by coming together to reduce carbon emissions. In our bid to reach net zero, businesses will play a critical role in tackling climate change. And that is why we want to ensure we understand where our own customers are on their journey to net zero. By doing so, EDF will hopefully be able to provide the solutions to enable them to reach their targets. So, we recently carried out a survey with some of our customers, and what we learned is that 63% expect to increase their investment in sustainability over the next 2 to 5 years. And 70% believe their organisation will need external help to achieve net zero. But what we do recognise is that it's not a one-size-fits-all approach. In fact, only 25% of the world's largest corporates have set net zero targets, and only 1,000 businesses are currently working with the Science Based Targets Initiative to reduce their emissions in line with climate science. However, hopefully with our renewable energy options, you can see it's possible to achieve your environmental goals. So now I'll hand over to Matt, who will take you through these options in more detail.
Thanks, Amanda. I hope your throat's okay. And
yeah, sorry, everybody.
That was a great introduction. I think probably one of the key points you mentioned there is that it's not a one-size-fits-all approach. So hopefully what I'll take you through this morning is some of the different options which are available in order to demonstrate kind of net zero. So I'll start with a few options, a few of the simpler options, and then we'll talk about kind of corporate PPAs and on-site generation very briefly. So probably the first option to mention today is zero carbon backed power. So this is simply where the power from our nuclear fleet is used in order to evidence the carbon intensity of your supply. So probably worth noting here is that it's not renewable power, and it's not labelled as renewable power, it's zero carbon. And unlike the renewable power, which is evidenced by Regos, this is evidenced by generator declaration. So the other point to mention, as with kind of renewable backed supplies, the power is generated and supplied onto the national grid. It's power from the grid, which is then supplied to your premises. So I think that's probably a fairly obvious point for most people on the call, but it's not something that everyone's aware of. So that's the nuclear option. The other consideration there is that nuclear is base load. So unlike some of the intermittent renewable technologies, nuclear is quite an important part of the UK fuel mix in delivering that base load power. And just the final point to mention on this is kind of our best value option at the moment, although it is limited to the extent of the generation of our nuclear power stations. The next option I'm just going to mention is renewable backed. So this is simply electricity backed by renewable sources and evidenced by Regos. So for those of you that don't know what Rego is, Rego stands for Renewable Electricity Guarantee of Origin, and it's a certificate that's issued by Ofgem for every qualifying megawatt hour of generation. So for wind, solar, hydro, biomass, biogas, etc. EDF are the largest off-taker of PPA volume in the UK, which also means we have a great mix of renewable backed options that we can offer. And it's just worth mentioning that there are different flavours of renewable. So the kind of standard would be UK renewable. So that would be Regos from the UK of any technology. There's also offerings of asset-specific renewables. So organisations can specify which technology they would like their renewable energy to be sourced from. So sometimes we might see a preference for solar or wind, or even a combination of technologies, and that's perfectly possible. The next kind of the next offering is still renewable based on Rigos, but this is where you can select specific assets. So the generation asset can be named here, but unlike a PPA, the long-term commitment isn't required. So this can be a great kind of CSR or PR story, particularly if you're local to a specific asset. And it's a bit like a PPA really, but without the complexity. One of the benefits here is that it gives real life visibility of where the power is sourced and the asset. And we've also seen examples where organisations are incentivised to spend locally, and in some cases, internal governance allows the cost to be attributed to this kind of renewable power. And it's just worth noting that typically this type of arrangement is slightly more expensive than unnamed renewable power. It's worth also noting, in terms of kind of authenticity, all of the products that we've talked about so far are backed by independently audited by the Carbon Trust. So that can also make kind of compliance teams' lives easier in terms of reporting scope 2 emissions. And then the other point, just on those first few options I've covered, is that they don't give additionality. So whilst they're a great stepping stone, electricity is already being generated, so it's not bringing additional power to the grid. And if your organisation doesn't procure that power, another may. So that's kind of the kind of renewable backed examples, or zero carbon backed. Now I'm going to kind of touch on the corporate PPA and on-site generation, which is perhaps where things kind of start to get a bit more real. I'm only going to cover corporate PPAs at a high level today, but simply a corporate PPA is where you enter a contract with a generator to buy the output from their asset for a longer term period. So typically these agreements are 10 to 15 years. And the reason for this is that a generator needs certainty of the price achieved from their asset into the future, and that allows them to get financing for the project. So as we've seen, the electricity market's volatile, and the cost of the output needs to be fixed regardless of the future cost of electricity. So this is where kind of a large corporate or customer can help, because they can put a contract in place to buy the power at a fixed price, and that's typically inflation linked, and that's for a longer period of time that they would normally commit to. It's probably worth noting that at the moment the cost of a PPA is well below the current wholesale market price, although this hasn't always been the case and may not be in the future. So obviously we don't have certainty of where the power price is going, whilst currently seems like incredible value in the short term at least. And so the generator receives certainty of receiving a fixed price for a long period, and ultimately that allows the project to go ahead. There are a number of different options in terms of contract structure here, which include whether the corporate PPA is physical or virtual, and whether you contract directly with the generator or supplier. So I'm not going to go into all the detail of these options today, but we do have some material available on our website, which covers these in a bit more detail. Also, our account managers are in a position to kind of touch on these in a bit more detail. Probably one other consideration here is how you deal with the intermittency of the output of the asset. So typically there'll be a kind of balancing party involved, which will help convert the intermittent generation of a renewable asset to something more consistent, which is used for electricity supply. So obviously EDF are able to offer this service, as are other suppliers in the UK. It's also worth noting that the PPA products, or the corporate PPA products, are fully compatible with our flexible purchasing product. So you would simply transfer the block volume from a corporate PPA into a flexible contract. Another point to note, so the contracts don't necessarily need to co-terminate, so you don't need to sign a supply contract for 10 to 15 years to match the PPA. And typically you could still have a 2-3 year supply contract with a longer term PPA, and they do tend to be portable. So just touching on some of the benefits of a PPA. So I think one is additionality. So the first options we discussed are around kind of existing renewables and zero carbon. The corporate PPA does bring additionality. So this simply means that without your investment, the renewable generation would not be on the grid. So this is kind of gold standard. And in bringing the additional generation online, the carbon credentials are stronger. So I think that what we're seeing now is many organisations that have kind of started their journey by using either renewable or zero carbon products are starting to explore corporate PPAs and see whether these are right for their businesses. There's a few additional considerations. So contracting can be a bit more challenging. There's credit considerations and approvals too within your organisation. Typically, 10 to 15-year agreement might be more difficult to get signed off and approved. And the account management team here at EDF can help you navigate some of that kind of complexity. And I think probably just the final point on corporate PPAs is that they're not instant. So typically once the kind of contracting stage is kind of complete, there can be a couple of years between the kind of signature and the generator coming online or the commercial operations date. So that's a really quick whistle stop tour of corporate PPAs. There's loads of detail I've not covered there. There's a bit more on our website in terms of structures, and please do get in touch with your account manager if you'd like more information on those. And finally, on this slide, we start to talk about on-site generation. So this is simply as suspected. This is where the asset is located on your premises. So this could be solar panels on your roof, wind turbine in the car park, perhaps. We've seen a kind of combination of these, but similarly to the corporate PPA, this is a longer term investment, and there are a few advantages. So this is a great sustainability story. The asset is visible, particularly if it's panels on the roof. You can be seen to be making positive change, and it also brings the additionality that we've talked about on corporate PPAs. So that's one benefit. Typically the power is generated behind the meter, so that means that it won't attract the third-party non-energy costs in the same way as a corporate PPA would. And there's an additional benefit of security of supply. So there's an off-grid element to on-site generation, obviously, and that perhaps gives you some confidence that you can continue to consume in the event of an outage. I think that the benefit being that if you do still need the grid, you're still connected and you can still utilize that for your kind of import power requirement. So probably just on the on-site generation, there's a couple of other points here. So there's different options as to how you might finance on-site generation. So you might be looking for a partner to invest upfront in the asset, and you could take the power for an extended period of time at fixed price. Or if you do have the capex available to invest upfront, that's also an option. Again, within EDF Group, we have solutions under each of those. So just to kind of wrap up on this slide, there's a number of options in existence for zero carbon supply. These options can either be based on existing renewable or low carbon assets, or bring additional renewable generation to the grid. The cost structures will vary. So typically for renewable or zero carbon electricity, an uplift is provided to your electricity contract. That's shorter term and requires a lot less kind of contracting effort. And for a corporate PPA or on-site asset, this can become more complicated as a commitment is usually long-term and outside of the electricity supply contract. And I think just the final point on this slide is that it's not all or nothing. So organizations can have a combination of these options in order to reach your own sustainability goals. So you might, for example, take a zero carbon supply option now, and then move across into the on-site generation or corporate PPA in the medium to long term. So yeah, that's kind of a whistle-top tour of the zero carbon supply options. So I've kept it fairly kind of generic so far. So this is where we can start to show off a bit in terms of some of the projects we've been involved with. It's not comprehensive, but there's a few examples of some of the innovative organisations in the UK we've partnered with and have also allowed us to create case studies. So all of these case studies, although in a more detailed form, are available on our websites. I'm just going to take you through a few of them at a high level now. So JP Morgan Chase, they've kind of taken things to the next level in terms of their renewable supply with a 24/7 product. And this is where the electricity consumed is matched in real time to renewable generation. And that's using blockchain technology. And power from EDF's generation portfolio is used in order to do this. Edrington, Scottish distilleries are supplied with energy produced by wind turbines, and they're using kind of 6 local wind turbines in order to supply their premises up in Scotland. So this is an example of the kind of select renewable product where you can actually take power from specific assets onto your premises. Nestle, unfortunately, they're a bit further from the generation, and they've been able to use a corporate PPA to supply power from a remote hill in Scotland to sites dotted around the UK. So they're able to use that corporate PPA in order to take that fixed power for the next 15 years. And Tesco have on-site generation, so they've got 15,000 solar panels across 14 stores, which have generated over 4 gigawatt hours in the first year. So that's just a very quick tour of some of the projects we've been fortunate enough to work with, and there's full case studies available on our website that talk a bit more about the detail of those projects.
Great, thanks, Matt. That's all been really interesting. So what would you say is important for customers to consider for the options you've just taken us through?
So I think really within organisations, it's about setting a strategy. So what exactly would you like to achieve and by when? I think within that it's worth being realistic about the resource and cost implications of kind of delivering that strategy.
Great, thanks. And absolutely, obviously, costs play such a huge factor in setting sustainability objectives. But you also mentioned resources here. So what advice would you give to businesses when they're reviewing their goals?
So I think it's a really hot topic at the moment. I think that most organisations are on or are starting their net zero journey. So I'd say speak to other organisations that are on the similar journey. There are lots of events and working groups focused on the topic of net zero. And I guess this also gives you the ability to kind of learn from other people's mistakes too.
Yeah, absolutely. Great. And we've kind of seen across customers and other businesses that sometimes there's a bit of a struggle to get commitment from all stakeholders in the business. So what would you suggest to those people who are trying to get kind of a full buy-in for net zero across their business?
So I think it's about being realistic, but perhaps about also presenting the challenges in the right way. So for example, a PPA does require a long-term commitment, but it can also provide a long-term hedge against future kind of price changes. So that can be some of the challenges can also be converted to kind of benefits and positives. So I think really it's all about finding out what matters to each stakeholder, and perhaps trying to spin the approach from their perspective. It's worth considering kind of risk appetite too. So is it a shorter term, simpler approach that might be required, or something longer term? It's definitely not easy. I think that certainly kind of say there's no kind of silver bullet here, but I think that with energy being so in the kind of public eye currently, there's no time like the present in terms of having some of those conversations.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Matt. I hope everyone has found that useful. We are running right on time, so we'll open up our Q&A now. I've seen a few have popped through while Matt has been talking, but if you haven't asked any questions yet, feel free to add those into the Q&A function and we'll run through what we can. Any questions we don't get to, we'll share our contact details at the end and you can get in touch and we'll make sure we come back to you directly. Just move on. So I think one of the questions that's come in is why are the prices for Regos at the moment so high in comparison to previous years? Matt, are you okay to take that one?
Of course, yeah. Thought this might come up. So it really is supply and demand. So there's an increasing demand for renewable power, or Regos, and that's kind of pushed the price up. I think that probably worth also mentioning there's been some uncertainty around European guarantee of origins, and it's currently unknown as to the future of kind of being able to recognise European guarantees of origin in the UK. So that's kind of also kind of meant that the kind of UK renewable energy guarantee of origins are in higher demand.
Great, thank you. And I think kind of linking to that one, possibly another question has come in that says, what evidence can you provide to demonstrate where Regos come from?
So here at EDF, we're audited by the Carbon Trust. So all of our renewable and net zero products are audited. Certainly for our larger customers, we're able to provide reporting which goes into the detail in terms of which certificates have been allocated to customers. But hopefully the assurance is that that we do have this kind of external audit process in place, which kind of gives the consumer that confidence.
Great, thank you. I'm not sure if any other questions have come through. I think as I'm sharing, I've lost the ability to see.
So I can see some questions. So do EDF sell baseload PPAs? I think the short answer is yes. We're able to offer a kind of a baseload PPA product. I think that what typically might not be the case is that the kind of baseload conversion may not kind of match the date of the PPA. So you might not, you wouldn't necessarily have a baseload product for the 10 to 15 years of the PPA. We can certainly manage a PPA as kind of baseload power output in the kind of short to medium term. So typically that's kind of the 1 to 5 year space. Someone's just asked about the 24/7 offering, what renewable assets to use to provide the power. So I think the 24/7 offering is a kind of fairly new concept to us, and the agreement we have with JP Morgan is fairly new. So we use some of our existing assets. I'm not sure if they're named, but they're existing assets, which enables us to take that kind of generation profile and ensure that it matches their demand at all times. So that's kind of how that offering works, and it's kind of tracked using kind of blockchain technology. It's probably worth, in order to give a bit more detail on that answer, is that there is a case study online that goes into quite a lot of detail. So just recommend perhaps reading through that. I've also got a question just around, do you think the European GOOs will cease to be available in the UK as part of the renewable fuel mix post-Brexit? I think the view at EDF is, yes, we do believe they will cease to be available in the UK post-Brexit. So there's kind of definitely a risk there if you're planning on using those for kind of fuel mix disclosure. We're certainly not providing those under our UK renewable product at the moment. So I've had a question around what happens to CPPA if the electricity market's reformed during the lifetime of a contract. I think we'll probably have to take that one away. I mean, the contracting structure is fairly complex and covers a number of eventualities, but I'm not sure on that particular item. So hopefully we can come back to you directly on that one.
Great, thank you. Were there any other questions anyone wants to ask at this time, just before we move on? Just give everyone a second. No, that's fine. I mean, like I said, in a second, we'll share our contact details. So feel free to contact us after the webinar if anything pops into your head or if you wanted some more detail. Before we go, we just wanted to share that we are doing another webinar on Thursday, where our Director of Net Zero Strategy and Policy, Rebecca Beresford, joins Fiona Cormack to discuss the energy market crisis and what it means for the UK's net zero ambitions. So they will be covering upcoming regulatory change, government interventions, and the impact of Russia's invasion on Ukraine. You can sign up to this on our website, which is edfenergy.com, and the Talk Power events page to register, and it's completely free, just like this one. And like we said, if there's any other areas you'd like to understand, please feel free to get in touch via let's talk power at edfenergy.com or visit our website. And equally there you can find up-to-date information on the industry news and updates from us. And please do follow our dedicated EDF Business Solutions LinkedIn page. But thank you all so much for joining. I hope you found it useful. We'll share the recording with you after, but goodbye for now.